Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is nutrition, and we're going to discuss the last meal. This isn't like the last meal you'd ever have in your life. We're more so discussing the last meal of the day. So there's just some kind of fun things to think of when it comes to what is the proper meal for the end of the day. And there are kind of common beliefs people will have that maybe don't have situational correctness. So I thought it would be fun to talk about why people would pick certain foods over other foods at different times. So we're going to jump right into it like we normally do, okay? Is kind of in podcast 41, titled Diet Right, What Matters Most, we discuss the top components of a diet, like what will make a diet, kind of like what goes into a diet, like what's involved in it, and what are the things, the components that matter most in the order that they matter the most. So where should you place your focus? So the first thing of most importance is calories. So your caloric content, like your caloric amount, the intake that you have per day, will determine the direction of your quote unquote diet. Now, diets aren't necessarily always for fat loss or weight loss. You can actually diet to gain weight. You can diet for better performance. You can diet for optimal aesthetics in terms of body composition. Dieting, just in the way I use the word, is a structured way of eating. So it just means that you have some form of thought behind what's going on, and there's structure to it. So calories will determine the direction of a diet. So if I eat the best foods in the world, but I eat too many calories, I will gain weight. So if your goal is fat loss, and you're worried about whether something's organic or not organic, or whether something's grass-fed or not grass-fed, or you have your focus on other components, other areas than calories, so you can make great decisions in the other areas that are involved in a diet. But if you're not controlling and paying attention to your calories, no matter how good of foods you eat, good quality of foods you eat, if you overeat, you will not lose weight no matter how good and healthy those foods are. Okay? So calories have to be in a controlled deficit if our goal is weight loss, and calories have to be in a controlled surplus if our goal is weight gain, but in a high quality type of weight gain rather than just getting fat. Okay? So calories are by far the most important. The next most important thing would be protein content, making sure you have enough protein in your diet. The third most important is meal timing, whether you're eating the right foods at the right times, which is kind of what we're going to talk about with this last meal concept. And then the fourth most important thing is actually macronutrient quality. So whether something's organic or grass-fed or this or that. Okay? So since calories is most important, that's the first component that we want to look at when we figure out what we should do with the last meal of the day. So if I'm going to say, okay, I want to eat optimally for the moment I'm in, the first place we look for is calories. So some things to consider is our recovery needs at that time of the meal. So if we've had a workout maybe that day, so we're going to need more calories at last meal than we would if we didn't work out that day. And the reason why was just have more of a caloric deficit from the day by exercising, so therefore we have more space to fill. So the reason why this is important to know is if on days I work out, I eat, let's just say like on days I work out or don't work out, I eat the exact same meal as my last meal of the day. And let's assume that there's no other variations throughout the day. So you're not eating any differently on days you work out versus days you don't work out. Now, typically what that means is on the days you do work out, maybe you're in a greater caloric deficit because you burned more calories. So there could be an allowance for greater calories at the last meal of the day and not have it contribute to fat gain, but actually contribute to recovery. So there's like a lot of asterisk to everything I'm saying here in the sense that there's variables that are going to be beyond the scope of a singular podcast. So, for example, we've talked in the past podcast about how caloric cycling is extremely important for fat loss. So that was podcast 173, the need for caloric cycling during diets. And in that podcast, we talk about if you have a sustained caloric level that is the exact same every single day, and let's say you have the exact same variable of physical activity. So you have the exact same calories you're burning, you have the exact same calories you're eating. Over time, your body will learn to operate on that caloric intake. So even if it's suboptimal, your body will learn to down-regulate everything it does to run off of the calorie amount that you're actually consuming, rather than what would be its best calorie amount. So the benefit of caloric cycling, which just means that you have varying amounts of calories, intentionally, by the way. So podcast 173 again is titled "The Need for Caloric Cycling During Diets." So the benefit of why we would want to cycle our calories, or why you would pay attention to your calories being variable per day, is so that way your body doesn't down-regulate its metabolism and run on a very low level of calories. So if I eat, say, 1,000 calories every day, my body is going to learn how to operate on only 1,000 calories. But if I eat 1,000 calories, say, 4 days of the week, then I have 2 days that I eat 1,200 and 1 day that I eat 1,600. I'm still going to have in net total over the week a caloric deficit, but my body isn't going to down-regulate to the 1,000 because I'm having those days of 1,200 and that 1 day of 1,600. That's going to prevent my body from down-regulating all the way to 1,000, and it'll actually keep my metabolism a little bit higher due to those higher calorie days. But those higher calorie days won't shut off my progress for fat loss. So one of the ways I've done this before with aesthetic clients, where they have to get down to single-digit body fat, and we're getting on stage to get pro cards and stuff, is we'll do caloric cycling where they might have a day of maintenance, where we purposely are not losing any fat. We're actually just kind of letting their body recover. So this keeps their metabolism higher than if we had all days in a huge deficit. It also helps kind of have positive effects towards cortisol. So there's a lot of recovery aspects in terms of stress on the body that if you're always in a deficit, these negative things add up. So we might have 1 day of the week where they're at maintenance level. We might have, say 3 days a week or so at a controllable, kind of moderate deficit. And then they're going to have 1 to 2 days that are kind of like a shock deficit. And the shock deficit days, due to the other days being higher, the body on that day will kind of get caught off guard. It'll have to burn through a lot of body fat to deal with the day. And then as you would repeat that day, the body would start to downregulate, but we don't repeat the day. So our shock low days are spaced out. So they're not going to have them back to back. So for example, I've had a person do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, where they're at a medium caloric deficit. Wednesday, they're actually going to be at maintenance because that allows them a little bit of recovery in the middle of the week. Then on Saturday, they're actually going to be at maintenance. So that way, again, it kind of gives them a recovery. It gives our body a false sense of lull where it feels like, oh, okay, I'm fine. And then Sunday, we'll have a shock day. And they really have to dump a bunch of body fat off on Sunday because their body wasn't prepared for it. So when you use caloric cycling in that manner, you can prevent downregulation of metabolism while getting more body fat off than if you were at a consistent low level of calories. So that being said, okay, is that sometimes in order to have variable degrees of calories, we won't choose to consume a variable degree of calories. We'll actually choose to use our workouts, the calories burned from the workout, to create the greater deficit of that day. So sometimes when I have clients, and it depends on the client's lifestyle and their goals and stuff, but sometimes they'll eat the exact same number of calories per day, but I'm absolutely 100% using that on purpose to create caloric cycling, but the cycling is created through exercise rather than variable degrees of calories. The reason why this is sometimes better is a lot of people do mentally better when they have consistency in their nutrition. When they have variability in their nutrition, when they have a shock low day or a shock high day, the high days, for example, they tend to kind of go nuts and overeat because all of a sudden their body's getting more of the calories that it had been wanting. So those urges to eat are stronger. Then on the shock low days, sometimes the day after that, the person can't control their cravings. So it depends on their ability in willpower and just natural reaction to variables in their nutrition. So sometimes they're not in a correct mental state to have variable caloric intake. So we have variable caloric usage, and that'll create our cycling for us. Now, that was a side tangent, but it was absolutely necessary because if we talk about a day where you worked out and you would say, oh my, do I need to have more calories in my last meal of the day? There's a lot of variables to that. So I just want to raise awareness that if I've worked out that day and I've had an active day, and maybe it was above my normal active, then it's probably okay that we have above our normal calories. So for example, on the days that I do big leg workouts, I'll have rice in my last meal of the day because that rice is going to help go towards glycogen replention. So glycogen is stored carbohydrates in our muscles. So my body would fill in that stored carbohydrates before those extra carbohydrates would go towards body fat formation. So I might have a greater degree of carbs in that last meal on a big workout day, so that way I have good energy resource the very next day. So the next day I don't wake up with an empty gas tank. I can actually wake up with a full gas tank so I can operate throughout the day without being in a huge deficit, which is going to cause negatives towards my goals. So if somebody's wanting to build muscle mass or they're wanting peak performance, they don't want to operate all day on an empty gas tank. So they might actually have more food, okay, as their last meal of the day to replenish the gas tank to start the next day at a full gas tank. Okay, so that's something we would think of. Also, if I missed a meal earlier in the day, I'd want to maybe eat more at night, and through healthy foods. We're not saying eat more like through ice cream and pizza and crap, but you might eat more so that way your body doesn't wake up the next day and have major hard cravings because you just went the day before being significantly lower than what you needed. So say today you missed a meal and you're 500 calories below what you'd normally be, and you just go to bed. The next morning, you're going to wake up ravenous and really have a hard time fighting off cravings. So if you just go ahead and have a couple, like 200 or 300 extra calories at the last meal of the day, that can wake up tomorrow and not have the cravings that might ruin the day tomorrow. So where if you have a small couple hundred the night before added to your last meal, you don't ruin the entire day the next day by having an extra 2,000 or 3,000 because you lost your mind and the cravings were too strong. So craving control can actually be a reason to increase your caloric intake at the last meal of the day. So there are variables, okay? Another variable for caloric consideration would be as if I have a workout early the next morning. So if I work out in the mornings, my last meal of the day can actually and should be kind of higher in calories. So that way, again, I wake up with a full gas tank and I can actually train better the next day if performance of my training is a significant importance to me. Okay, so those are some things you would think of with calories. Is if I didn't do much that day and I didn't work out, I can probably go ahead and have a caloric reduction on my last meal. If I missed meals that day, I might want to have a couple, like maybe a half a meal extra for my last meal to control cravings that might kick in the next day. Also, if I worked out that day, maybe a big workout versus no workout at all, I might also have more calories to help me repair from that workout and actually refill my gas tank of energy for the next day. So those are some things to think of. How about protein? Since in podcast 41, we talk about, diet right, what matters most, the 5 components, protein is the second most important component. What do we do with protein at the last meal of the day? You absolutely, definitely 1,000,000% should have protein in your last meal of the day because your body is going to use that protein to fix and repair things throughout the night. So protein is how our body fixes stuff. So it fixes and repairs muscles, it grows our hair, grows our skin, grows our nails. It does a lot of body repair through protein. So even if you didn't work out that day, you should definitely still have protein in your last meal so your body can actually get some work done and repair things while you're sleeping. So you should never, never, never not have protein in your last meal of the day. There should always be protein. Now, if I had a big workout that day and I have a lot of existing muscle damage going into the nighttime, then I want to make sure I have a high amount of protein so that way my body can fix that muscle damage. So not only can it repair from the regular stress of the day, it can also repair from that added stress of the workout. So we talk about in podcast number, I'm trying to find it really quick, holy crap, there it is, 33. How much protein do I need? Podcast 33 tells you how much protein you need. The window of variability is 0.6 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, and this is relatively lean body weight. So if I weigh 300 pounds, but I'm actually a 200-pound person with 100 pounds of fat on me, I don't want to use 300 as my number, I want to use 200. So it would be relatively lean body weight. So let's just say somebody weighs 200 pounds. Okay, 0.6 to 1 gram per pound would mean they eat 120 grams to 200 grams of protein per day. Then if I'm having, say, 5 meals, and say I'm going off to 200 grams of protein, that means each meal should have around 40 grams. And that would be my kind of, that would be the higher of the window, the 1 gram per pound of body weight. So this would be somebody who did like really aggressive training. Okay, they beat the living crap out of themselves when they're in the gym. They almost always have muscle damage. They're just, one day's an upper body day, one day's a lower body day, one day's a bench day, one day's a squat day. So they always have muscle damage going on. It's just variable in where in their body they're having it. So they're going to have high need for protein because they're always recovering. So they should be towards the high end of that window, that 0.6 to 1 gram. They should be near the 1 gram. If somebody's only training 2 or 3 days a week, even if they're training hardcore, they definitely do not need 1 gram per pound of body weight on the nights of the days they don't train. So even if you think you're, hardcore beast moding it, but you didn't beast mode it since Saturday and all of a sudden it's Monday or Tuesday, you don't need a lot of protein Monday or Tuesday night, okay? So it's really the night of the workout that you want to replenish and make sure you have high protein. So if I normally am consuming around 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, then on the nights of my big workouts, maybe I'd bump it up to 1 gram. So that's something to consider is if I have existing muscle damage above normal, I would eat my protein above normal. Okay? The next thing we look at is, do we have carbs or fats with our protein? So you absolutely need to have protein at every meal, okay? Especially the last meal of the day. And that's like you don't have to have protein in the midday meals. You can, as long as it's spread out evenly throughout the day. But there definitely should be protein in the last meal of the day. So with that protein, do I have carbohydrates or do I have fats? Well, it kind of depends on some things. So again, if I have an early morning workout the next day, I can have carbohydrates with my last meal of the day. And that will better lead towards replenishing my glycogen stores. And glycogen, again, is stored carbohydrates in the muscles. That's almost like having a gas tank within per muscle of the body. So when we say of having a full gas tank, when we think of having full energy, our body doesn't have a singular gas tank like a car does. All of our muscles hold the energy. So if I have 2,000 muscles, I have 2,000 small gas tanks. That's the way we can kind of think of it. So glycogen is kind of the gas tank for that muscle. So my chest has this is all ridiculously basic. So the language sounds a little goofy, but I just want to get the premise across that my chest would have its own kind of fuel source within the muscle cells. My tricep would have its own fuel source within the muscle cells. So when we say stored carbohydrates in the muscles, it's stored in the form of glucose, which is energy. So our body's storing energy. If we have insufficiently fueled glycogen stores, our body will refuel the glycogen before it most likely goes to converting extra carbohydrates towards body fat. So if we are depleted of glycogen and we have carbohydrates at night, they will not automatically contribute to fat gain. Our body will use the carbohydrates to replenish the glycogen before the carbohydrates get converted over to body fat. So this is helpful to know because if I'm ending the day with insufficiently fueled glycogen, where I burned up a lot of my carbs, I burned more carbs than I ate that day. Well, if I went to bed without any carbs, I'm going to wake up the next day and my muscles are going to be deflated, have really no energy, and my morning workout is going to suck. And I'm going to have to rely on a lot of caffeine in order to make it through. So instead of that, if I know that I have a low carbohydrate day, and I know that my carbohydrate stores, my glycogen stores in the muscles, are not sufficiently topped off, then I can have some carbs at night, not worry about it going to body fat, and actually have better energy throughout the next day, okay, into that morning workout or even the next day overall for energy wise. So that's why I was saying, like, if I have a really aggressive workout, okay, and maybe I work out in the evening, then I know I'm going to bed with empty glycogen stores. So I can have carbohydrates at nighttime, at my last meal of the day, and not have to worry about getting body fat because the carbohydrates are going to contribute to replenishing the glycogen stores that I would have burned up in that workout. So that's helpful for us to know because we don't always have to avoid carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can do awesome things for us. They're a great fuel source, okay? So understanding if I have empty fuel sources and I used more energy than I ate that day, and I want to have good energy the next morning, I can have carbohydrates at night. Now, if I kind of had a good full day of eating, I wasn't really in a major deficit by the time I'm going to bed, then fats are a better choice to pair with your protein. Okay? So that way, if you have any excess, fats are much slower digesting than carbohydrates. So as the fats digest, over, say, the span of 5 to 6 hours, our body can slowly burn them off through repair as they're released. Whereas with carbohydrates, if I eat the same number of calories and my body can process that carbohydrate in 2 hours, maybe it didn't need all the calories in 2 hours, so it's going to contribute to storing some of that as body fat. Okay? So if I have an early morning that I want to be hyperactive, I want to have fuel, I can have carbohydrates the night before. If I don't need that, if I had a full day of eating and I'm not really going to be super busy in the morning, then fats are a better choice. Now, in general, when it comes to what types of carbs or what types of fats, we want to eat very slow digesting sources. So for carbohydrates, that would be complex carbohydrates, not simple carbohydrates. Simple is another name for sugars. So, and we've talked about the various types of carbohydrates in podcast 21 titled Carbs, Good or Bad. Okay? So there are times when sugar is the correct carbohydrate you should eat. And there are times when sugar is the not correct carbohydrate you should eat. But sugar is not horrible. Sugar does not cause cancer. Sugar doesn't make you die instantly. Okay? You just have to consume the amount you're going to use, not more than what you would use. But when it comes to the last meal of the day, we want things that are going to digest slowly. So if I'm going to be sleeping for 6 hours, the ideal thing would be to have that food digest for the entire 6 hours. So there are different digestive rates. Okay, when it comes to carbohydrates, you can look at something called the glycemic index. And there's another thing called a glycemic load, and you would use those in combination to find out the right carbohydrate, blah, 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 blah. But in general, there is a digestive rate of carbohydrates. So, for example, sugars, okay, Gatorade, digests very quickly, whereas a sweet potato might take a lot longer. So you would want to have more complex, slower digesting carbohydrates. Okay, that would be like sweet potato, oats, things that are more kind of hearty, like beans, for example. So that's a great one. That's a nice, slow digesting kind of carbohydrate if you're going to choose carbohydrates. Then for fats, in general, most fats are pretty slow digesting, so you don't have to really worry too much about which type of fat in terms of slower versus faster digesting. There are different digestion rates of, say, for example, like, say, olive oil versus like red meat. So there are different digestive rates in that sense, but fats are not something you have to worry as much about. And one of the reasons why it's good, okay, to consider the digestion rate of our carbohydrates and fats is it helps to also sustain and prolong the digestion of the proteins that we eat with those carbohydrates and fats. So when you do food pairing, okay, when you put protein with a carb or protein with a fat, that'll slow down the digestion of the protein. So that'll actually help the protein last longer throughout the day. So when we have like for example, people with who are diabetic and they have to eat for like controlling blood sugar. Okay, in podcast 53, we titled "Controlling Blood Sugar," and then also in podcast 213 titled "Battling High Blood Glucose and Triglycerides." We talk about this concept of food pairing. That one of the issues people have when they're diabetic is they'll have carbohydrates, their body can't regulate them well, and they get this huge surplus influx of like sugar release and all this stuff. So when you pair proteins with their carbohydrates, it tends to make the carbohydrates release slower, and they'll have lower spikes and drops in their blood sugar. So if somebody's diabetic, if they were to pair their carbohydrates with their proteins, they're going to have a better regulated blood sugar throughout the day than if they were to have carbohydrates by themselves rather than being paired with the protein. Okay? So these are all very, very, very important things to know because they're super helpful for not only for health effects, but for energy effects and maximizing our recovery and recovery in terms of overall energy and recovery from like workout to workout in terms of making sure our joints are repaired, but then also getting the optimal adaptations to our training. So when it comes to the last meal of the day, I understand that most likely everything I've said here has been a little bit complex. But I wanted to say and show that there's a lot of variables when it comes to food selections, even in a singular meal of the day. So we could do a whole podcast about breakfast. You could do the whole podcast about a midday meal and what would be the right calories, protein, and carbs or fats, macronutrient types, all that stuff. So it was just to raise a little bit of awareness. Now, the general theme, okay, is on a day I did less. Maybe I didn't work out. Maybe I wasn't hyperactive. Okay, I didn't really do much that day. It would make sense and it would be totally reasonable to have a low calorie, kind of a small meal before bed. Okay, your last meal of the day. However, if you do big hardcore training and you're super active that day, and you notice that all of a sudden every 2 or 3 days you tend to have really bad cravings, maybe you break your diet and have binges, you may need to increase the calories you're having in your last meal per day. Even just a 100, 200 calorie increase, okay, can prevent those 3,000, 4,000 calorie day blow-ups that people often have whenever they are too restrictive, and eventually our body's cravings and intensities for food win the battle. So often people mentally beat themselves up for overeating when it's not their fault. The way their nutrition is set up is actually underfeeding them, and their body needs those higher calories to survive. So it's very important to recognize that on days I was super active and on days I maybe did really aggressive workouts, I can eat more and not worry about being fat. Okay. Now we are only talking about maybe a 200, 300 calorie like increase here. We're not talking about, having like a medium-sized pizza from Domino's. So you want to have just an additional, like maybe 100, 200, 300 calories. You can play with it. Add 100 calories to your last meal, see how it feels after a couple of days. If you're still kind of hungry, you still have those cravings and stuff, then try bumping it to 200 calories. And maybe those cravings will go away. So we can create an easier on us mental state by understanding the correct amounts of foods we should have in each individual meal of the day, and in this example, the last meal of the day. So, just some things to think of, to be aware that there's variability in that last meal, and go ahead and play around with that and see if you can find something that better matches your needs. So on days you don't do much, don't eat much. On days you do more, eat more, and that's okay. Now, if you need any help kind of setting this stuff up or need any help with more information, check out the podcast that we've mentioned, okay? Especially podcast 41, Diet Right, What Matters Most, so you can better understand why these components are important to consider. And you can always email us, brutalironGym@gmail.com, and we're always happy to help, okay? So, but this is just some good food for thought, no pun intended there, and just giving you some leeway and permission to play around with that last meal to see what works best for you. Cool. Okay. If you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutaliron@gmail.com. Cool. As always, I hope this was helpful. And thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.